Hello, this is Catherine, and this is Taking Tea with Catherine. This is mixed berry and hibiscus herbal tea. Healthy and delicious. Such a win-win. Nice spring teacup and saucer that I've had for some time. It's supposed to be a spring theme. From VIII in the UK. Someone actually brought it back to me from a trip to the UK. So that's nice, right? Okay, so that's a long time ago. But speaking of a long time ago, I've had a lot of little markers in April, the month of April, of, oh, on this day this happened in my personal history. And, you know, a lot of people don't tend to mark those kind of things down. But you gotta have fun with something. And April 10th was the day that my family adopted a cat. So I call that my Becoming a Cat Person Day. And April 11th was the day that, even though it wasn't the first time I ever heard a song from Queen, it was the day that I heard Bohemian Rhapsody as a teenager and registered that it was from the group Queen. And it started an interest and an obsession that lasted many years and kind of never went away. So I kind of think of April 11th as Queen Day to me. It doesn't, not in any other calendar. But, so I thought at first maybe I should show you guys my collection of books about Queen and Freddie Mercury, but then I realized that most of those books are up in a very high spot in my apartment, and I don't feel like climbing when I don't have to, because it wouldn't be a good time to fall and go to a hospital right now. It never is a really good time, but, and I'm also lazy. Also, there's other ones that are somewhere else that I'd have to dig through, and I just, so I thought, how about doing a small tour? Not a conclusive, all the way comprehensive, whatever word, of every book I have in this category. Just a few books that I have about queens. Mostly reigning queens. And just books, some novels. Most of these books I've read already. Most of these are England-ish centered, but not all. So let me show you a few. And again, I have had many enjoyable experiences reading books about queens of different places. I don't seem to be able to find any books, well, one of them actually has something about Cleopatra, but I thought I'd read a lot more about her. And then I realized I did, but they were library books, so I don't have them. So it's not really a good tour when it's a book that I don't have. It doesn't make sense. So this is not that every book I have, these are my favorites, you know. There's not a lot about Queen Victoria here, and I love Queen Victoria, and I have books about Queen Victoria, but again, not completely, you know, conclusive, etc. So I'm going to do a slightly, not quite, but slightly in order of when they were around and alive. This book's got a little dented. I think I've shown this one to you guys, or at least mentioned it. So I've read a lot about the history of England and Britain, but mostly England, from the Norman invasion onward. So that's a lot of 1066 till now. But I haven't still read that many books about, or even have many books about previous to that time. But here is one I've had for some time and read a little while ago. And that's Queen Emma and the Vikings by Harriet O'Brien. And she was Queen Emma. It was the time period with Ethelred, King of England, so Saxon, and then when he was gone, she ended up marrying Canute. I have to make sure I had that right, but I did. And so that was, you know, the whole where the Vikings come in. And although I think she was also like a, anyway, I don't have to get into somehow this time period, I'm all over the place when I try to explain it, so I'm not quite the expert yet. I just know that she was important because that was when everything was sort of coming together. You know, there were years of Viking invasions and holding them off, and the Saxons and the Anglo-Saxons, whatever, trying to fight off Viking invasions and the hordes and whatever. But this was kind of on the cusp, right before the Norman invasion became a thing. So it really is kind of like the prequel to the Norman invasion. So it's not too far back. And it was pretty good. They don't know that much about, you know, people at that time. extensive things. I'm using the word extensive. So sometimes you'll find just a lot of little different records that they could glean from. But it's a good start to the pre-Norman, although it's still kind of Norman, history. Yeah, you know, that's the thing that another thing that I've had a lot of books out from libraries, etc., that have queens that were consorts. And so they're technically queens, but there's not a lot known about them because people were focusing more on the kings. The kings were doing a lot more communicating, so they have a lot more to glean from. And that's why we only know things about, like, what kind of silks they ordered or whatever. I don't know when silks came in to play, but you know the idea. All right, here's someone who I just really enjoyed reading about. So I've read a few books about her in fiction and non-fiction. One of the more interesting time periods, one of the more interesting people of the time period, and that is Eleanor of Aquitaine or Aquitaine. This is Alison Weir's version. This is, I think, the first book I read about her that wasn't fiction. And probably around 2001 maybe, 2001, that I read this book. I didn't buy this particular edition. I think I had a library book. I'm pretty sure my library book is the one book that I dropped in a bath. Hence why I don't bring books into baths anymore. And so I don't know where this one actually came from because it doesn't have any markings in it. It's possible I got it from one of those library sales or etc. But it's been a while. But it gets into her life. One of the most interesting queens because she wasn't really a reigning. She was a consort herself, but she was so important because she was the Duchess of Aquitaine, and when she married Henry II, she had been married before. She'd been married to the King of France. So, but she only had girls with him, and then they got annulled from. They had all kinds of, you know, they were kind of related, so they could get that. They could break up, but then she gets together with Henry II, who was a bit younger than her, and she ends up having. I mean, she had some daughters, but she had a whole bunch of sons. Henry VIII would have been so happy, and she had all kinds of experience. She had been to crusades. You know, I mean, how many? And she lived through all that time of Henry II dealing with Thomas Becket and that death and the repercussions, and then at one point they had a lot of sons, which should be a good thing, but sometimes when you're not giving all of your sons enough to do, they get restless, and she kind of took the side of her sons, and then Henry found her and put her into captivity, basically, for many years. Not horrible captivity, but not fun if you're someone like her who likes to keep active. And until he died, basically. And then it was Richard the Lionheart who became the king, and then afterwards his brother. And she lived through all of that. She lived to, I think, around 80 or so. And her life, it's just an interesting, not just about her life, but just the time period, because it was still very medieval and the Crusades and all that. So there's just so much to learn from just this one book. And she was definitely one of the more interesting people of that period, although I'm sure there's plenty of others. Just, it's a good start. And, it's funny because I go on about this too, just a side point, but I was watching some reruns, because, that's what we're doing right now, of Endeavour, which is one of the shows I like to watch, about the young Inspector Morse, before he was Inspector. And there was an episode, an earlier episode, where there was a factory that made, like, rockets or whatever, I don't know. And the family was sort of split up. They weren't really, like, the parents split up, and then, but they all kind of co-owned the company and stuff, and a murder happened on their premises during a royal visit. And it was funny because the father's name, I think, is Henry, and the wife's name was Nora, and then their kids, they had a kid named Richard and John. I think they also had a son, Henry, who had died. And their last name was Broom, which Plantagenet was a broom plant, and where they lived and everything. It was just basically taking the history of Eleanor and Henry and kind of using that as an inspiration for this. I just thought that was kind of clever. That's one of the reasons I like Endeavor and Morse, but Endeavor more recently, because they take so many references, so many history references, and so many art references that a nerdy person like myself just can't help but enjoy looking for those things. Okay, moving on. This is a book I read years ago. I think I've read better versions of biographies of this person, of this queen. But this is the one I have. And I think I got it from the New York Library sale. What else is new? And this is Great Catherine, The Life of Catherine the Great, Empress of Russia by Carolee Erickson. And of course, any Catherine queen I'm going to be interested in. That's a little narcissistic, right? But there were quite a lot of Catherines in English history, but none of them were actually the reigning queens. They were consorts. She wasn't just I think she was the consort first, and her name was not originally Catherine, but when her, I guess, husband died, it's been a while since I read this book, she ended up taking over, I think, or did he die? I have to read this over again, because I'm forgetting a lot about her history, and it's a very interesting, crazy time to read about, and and it's not just European history, but, Russia is kind of like a separate entity. I know it's technically part of Europe and part of Asia, but and this part of history is during the, I guess, covering right before and during the American Revolution. So there was a lot going on in the world at that point. And anyway, I forgot a lot about her. But I know there were a lot of people that she was involved with. It was a different kind of royal history than I'm used to reading so many English history books. So I have to get back to this. But I remember enjoying reading about her history. Cringing a couple times, maybe. Now, here's someone who, when I was going through my massive, huge, colossal obsession with English history and reading every biography I could get my hands on about kings and queens of England, I avoided, as much as possible, reading about modern times and the Queen of England now, Queen Elizabeth II, when all that stuff was happening with Diana, and then she died and all that. It was a big part of the news and everything, and I knew it was part of history eventually. It would be, and now it is, but I don't know, it just didn't strike me as something I needed to read about, and I just felt like it was ongoing. Why read anything? But then I got an advanced reader copy, I think it was a complete copy though at this point, of Elizabeth the Queen, The Life of a Modern Monarch by Sally Bedell Smith. And she's a New York Times bestselling author. And is this the best biography of the Queen? I don't know. But it was up until, let's see, what time it was actually published, because I know it's been a while now, 2012. So it was pretty comprehensive. It got into her life from beginning till 2012, which I think was one of her jubilees, so it's probably why it was published around that time, and just her relationship with other people in the world, like the presidents, which, she's met almost all the presidents and spent time with, since she's been queen and before, probably. But I would say, because some people tend to think of her as a little bit dull compared to other royal figures, but she's made it to her 90s. She's seen so much history go by, and she's been a part of things, and people still are interested in her. They find her intriguing, and the fact that she's kept the royal thing, the corporation, the whole business intact, as it were, still, because, there are other royal families in Europe, for instance, but no one really focuses on them very much. But most people know about the Queen of England, and is it vital to have her now? That's a matter of opinion, and I don't get into politics or whatever, but you have to say that people are intrigued. And then this is before The Crown came out, and which is a very intriguing show, honestly. It's hard because I don't like to veer. I don't mind gossipy histories, especially of past times, because that could be fun. It could be a way to learn about things without being too dry. So I don't mind if things get a little bit, but I worry when modern, I don't like reading modern gossip. I don't like to read, look at that. So I was worried that that's what this would be. And, it was, sometimes it would be a little speculative or a little bit, intimate portrait kind of situation. But it was it read very well. I read it pretty quickly, and it got me intrigued to the point that I wanted to learn more about the more recent royal family and how could that be. And I still don't jump to read every book. I haven't actually read any books about Diana that I know of, or Charles, or all the young ones. I just haven't. I have a novel, I think, that I got at Book Off that is about her sister, which I might want to read soon because it, after watching The Crown, it became more of something that I want to look into. But it was just good enough without veering into like the trash about, So that is a very well-spoken statement, isn't it? But I would say, if you were saying, I want to read a book about Queen Elizabeth, I want to learn a little about her, this is a pretty good one. And not that I have other ones to draw from, but got good pictures, and I don't usually like to read biographies of people when they're still alive. Not entirely true. I've read about musicians or whatever, but you know what I mean. It's like their life isn't complete, so a biography wouldn't be complete, but her life is long enough that you could do that. And okay, I think I've said enough about that. But yeah, it's not just a book about her. It's a book about our times and our recent past. So there you go. So where am I? Here's a book that I haven't read, and it's on my TBR. It's been on my TBR for ages. I've read books by Margaret George. She writes a lot of historical novels, and sometimes based on other things, because I know she wrote one about Helen of Troy that I enjoyed, but how much of that is based on actual history. But I read the one, I know you can't see it today, but I have it up here somewhere, about Henry VIII, the autobiography of Henry VIII, which was well written because, again, and I'm going to get into this again, but when we think of Henry VIII, we think about his wives, and that's what we kind of base it on. I mean, we think a little bit about some of his policies, whatever, but really it's about his wives. Everything, before he tried to divorce Catherine of Aragon, who reads about that time period before that? Really? Who really gets into that? Who really wants to read a book about Henry VIII before Anne Boleyn? Right? If I say this and this diplomatic issue came up between France and England, Spain and England, blah, 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 first thing people want to know is, well, who was he married to at that point? So you don't think about him and his point of view. It was written very much from his point of view, and as if you were him, how you would be thinking, how you would be justifying yourself. And yet they'd also have like little notes from his fool, his little entertainer, Will Summers, I think his name was. I could have that wrong. So it was kind of like when Henry would be going off in his own tangents, you'd have a little aside saying, well, anyway, so I'm not showing you that today, but I have another book from not too long after that called Mary, Queen of Scotland and the Isles, a novel by Margaret George, author of the memoirs of Cleopatra. So, and I've read that too. Haven't I? Yes, I have. It's been a billion years since I read that. But I haven't read this one. I have kind of two minds about Mary, Queen of Scots, as they like to call her, because I'm like, we really don't know what went on in her head. She became queen as a little baby, then she was married off to France, and she had to contend with, I think it was Catherine de Medici as her, I think, mother-in-law, and then, then her husband died, and I'm pretty sure after that, I think she was only married to one of them. After a while, she came back to Scotland. She did not get along with a lot of people in Scotland, because not only was she a woman ruler who people were not into very much, even though Queen Elizabeth was the queen in England, but because she was Catholic and Scotland was becoming, not a Catholic country, so there were a lot of difficulties, and then her marriages and the violence that came as a result, and then she, you know, ended up fleeing to England and all that stuff. So you sometimes wonder what went through her head, but you also wonder how much of it was because she was a victim of circumstance, you know? So it would be a good book to read, I think. I just haven't gotten to it yet. It is huge. I know somebody was reading this book. Somebody was reading this book recently on, in March, I think, when they were doing March of the Mammoths. I know I saw this. So I gotta look through that again, see what they thought of it. So I sometimes also read, you know, I like historical fiction a lot, almost as much as I like actual history books. Maybe more than, who knows. And now here's two other books. Man, I'm going past 20 minutes. I can talk. And it's the same author, so I'm just going to go briefly. I do like her, but they look very similar, these two books by Antonia Fraser. There's The Warrior Queens and The Wives of Henry VIII. So The Wives of Henry VIII is pretty self-explanatory. It isn't, they were not reigning queens, but they were all interesting in their own way, and just everybody likes to read about the wives of Henry VIII at some point in their life, if they're into English history. So it's a good book. But I wanted to focus, because there's other books too. I know David Starkey has a book, and I have it somewhere. This one has a sticker on it. But The Warrior Queens I like because it gets into just more than just England and Europe. We have my cat's namesake, Zenobia, in here. Pretty sure Cleopatra's in here. I think Margaret Thatcher is in here. You know. These are Europe, sorry. Isabella, Queen of, well, she was, I think, married to Edward II. I think it's that Isabella that's in here. Oh, it's been a while since I read this book, but there's, I think, even like a, what is her name? Boudica? How do you pronounce that name? No one knows. Everybody says something different. That's why, even though I knew a cat with that name, I kind of thought about naming Janie that, because she kind of looks like that cat that I met with that name. I don't want to get confused with different, oh, it's this and this, that. So, never mind. So, okay, I don't know how to pronounce everything, but it has Jinga Mbandi of Angola, Catherine the Great, Tamara, Katerina Sforza, England's Two Matildas, which I haven't even gotten into that much, Henry II's mother, who was sort of Queen of England, but not really. And Tuscany's one, so that's Matilda. The Beautiful Queen Louise of Prussia and Queen Elizabeth I of England. Yeah, because, like, you're probably wondering, how come I'm not talking that much about Queen Elizabeth I and Queen Victoria? Those are two of my favorite ones to read about, because I can always talk about them. So it's good because it gets into, not, you know, extensive, ding, 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 ding. You know, these are not individual books getting into everything about these queens, and I haven't read this for a while, which is why I'm forgetting a lot about this. Would be an excellent reread. But I know I enjoyed it because I did a lot of, and I know I talk about how I don't like to write in books, but sometimes I write in pencil, and I made little commentaries in this entire, really snarky commentaries in this. There was someone's name in here that was just a bunch of consonants, and I wrote, I'd like to buy a vowel. I don't know, I crack myself up. But, yeah, Zenobia. I just love that name. Every time I say it to my cat, I just love it. And she was pretty cool. Apparently she didn't, you know. So, oh yeah. So when they were talking about Knox, who was, during Mary Queen of Scots' time, he was one of the people who was very much against Mary and her beliefs and everything. They had a quote from him saying something, and I wrote, this guy must have had veins popping out of his forehead at all times. So, yeah. Obviously I can't recommend this book because of my own personal writings in it, but, you know. So, and I just thought as a little, addendum? No. A little afterwards, I thought I'd just show this book that I haven't read yet, which is an autobiography of Agatha Christie, because she is the queen of mystery writers. She is the queen. So that is a small tour of my queenly library. There's more, and wow, something in this apartment is smelling really good right now. It's probably the tea. Wow, it just smells really nice. You know, it's nice if you have to be home. Anyway, so I hope you've enjoyed. Let me know if you guys have read any of these books. If you've read any of the ones that I haven't read, please comment down below. Or anything. And this is Catherine, taking tea with Catherine. Have a lovely, tea-filled, and royal day. Goodbye.